Va bene.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are glad to share with you a video message from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Morocco, Nasser Bourita.
Mesdames et messieurs, cher Luigi, c'est un plaisir de participer même virtuellement à cette 7e édition du Medron. J'y participe pour la 2e fois avec le même entrain et toujours le même constat. Les dialogues méditerranéens sont pertinents et nécessaires. Ils nous offrent un espace d'échange ouvert pour opposer des solutions innovantes à nos défis communs. Si ces rencontres se tiennent aujourd'hui, c'est grâce aux efforts louables de l'Italie.
This meeting today is important to gather actors in the region. I would like to thank my friend Luigi Di Maio and all the people that have made this possible. I would like also to say that I agree with the topics chosen. In particular, the future of our region, migration and pandemic. One is a conjunctural thing and the other one is not. The first is a natural phenomenon. The second, the pandemic, is something that we have to stop. One and the other mean that we need ambitious strategies. So we need to adopt specific approaches. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, pandemic had a major impact on migration and has shown vulnerabilities where they already existed, and it created disequalities where it did not exist. The socioeconomic conditions of migration have increased the precarity of migrant workers, but differently to what many think, the pandemic has not stopped migration. Mobility has slowed down, but the closing of borders has not stopped journeys. Journeys have just adjusted, routes have changed from the Western Mediterranean to the Eastern Mediterranean to the Central Mediterranean. Often migrants were a danger and they were faced to dangerous routes. Pandemic also shown quite evidently the impact that is a positive impact, the impact of migrants. Migrants are part of essential workers. They have contributed to find solutions to fight against the pandemic, and maybe they have also been forgotten. And the pandemic also shown the importance of the Marrakesh Pact. And the crisis also shown that it is important to make the situation of migrants regular, and they have to have access to social security. Pandemic didn't prevent us from working in this regard, quite the contrary, quite the opposite. Morocco last September organized an intergovernmental meeting on the World Pact on Migration, with the objective to review together the implementation of the Marrakesh Pact in Africa and to consolidate the conclusions in order to enrich the International Forum on Migration in 2021. Morocco was also designated as a country where the Marrakesh Pact was successfully implemented. A ministerial meeting was organized with all the model countries in order to raise awareness on the objectives of the pact. And finally, notwithstanding the pandemic, in December 2020, we inaugurated the African Observatory on Migrations in Rabat. And this first institution of the African Union is the result of the vision of the King Mohammed VI about migration, and it is an implementation of the Marrakesh Pact, and in particular, it implements its important objective that is having specific policies in the field. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we repeat it quite often, the pandemic will be stopped. We hope very soon, but migration will remain. And it is for this reason that the governance of migration is not to be an emergency governance. We need to take responsibility and have solidarity. This is what our King Mohammed VI wants to do. Morocco was also affected by the first wave of COVID-19. Morocco took important but difficult measures. We protected vulnerable people. We tried to protect our citizens' health, and the vaccination rate today is more than 60%. Morocco worked in order to face the challenges of the pandemic and turn them into opportunities. And during the 21st celebration of the throne, we seized the opportunity to redefine the order of priorities, having a strong and solid economy and having a more inclusive social model. Morocco is proud to have been able to turn the crisis represented by COVID-19 into an opportunity. And we created a strategic investment fund in particular. We use 11% of the GDP in terms of investments in the country, and we also improved social support and generalized universal healthcare access in Morocco. Under the leadership of our King Mohammed VI, we launched an ambitious project for the production of COVID-19 vaccines with the strategic objectives of ensuring the protection of citizens in Morocco. After the starting of the pandemic, Morocco, under the auspices of King Mohammed VI, has ensured health assistance to citizens in other countries and citizens in order to fight against COVID-19. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, whether it is migration or pandemic, it is always a region that is most affected, and it is Africa. In Africa today, we have new strains that are being developed. So it is legitimate to ask ourselves whether an equal vaccination would have prevented this situation from happening. It is urgent to plead a universal vaccination. A region that is under-vaccinated creates the conditions to mutate the virus, a virus that becomes more dangerous and stronger. So this two-speed vaccination has a risk, and it will have epidemiological repercussions, and we've seen it. But in addition to this vaccination gap, there is also an economic condition that we see, because this pandemic will continue to have consequences on the economic level. That is why Morocco intends to work in this regard under the auspices of our king. It is for this reason that Morocco today wishes to do more to promote justice, equality, hope, a place where opportunities are the same in the northern or the southern border of the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to introduce you this new panel, EU-Sahel Renewed Cooperation Prospect for the Stabilization of the Region. My name is Lorenzo Cremonesi. I'm a special envoy for Corriere della Sera since many years. We will talk about Sahel, and I asked on purpose to have the map. Sometimes we don't remember how deep and grave and important is the region that we are going to talk about today. It's a very large strip, long around 8,500 kilometers, which occupy about 7 million square of kilometers, which cross between 10, 12 states, depends from the sources: Gambia, Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea. About 150 million people, which according with the United Nations and different Institute of Studies, could reach 330, even 350 millions in 2050, with a very large number of youth, an incredible number of people, very young people. The Arab word for Sahel means, it's Sahil, which means shore border between the Sahara Desert and semi-desert area in the south, which is called savanna. Generally, when you read, when you study, when you look at Sahel, you don't find good elements. You find a place which is practically a nightmare, which encapsulates some of the worst problems of our planet, including lack of water resources, climate change, jihadi terrorism, Daesh presence, Boko Haram, illicit trafficking, human smuggling, migrants. Me, having been a lot in Libya in the last years, I can tell you the big majority of the migrants we meet in the refugee camps, in the different camps held by the militias in Libya are, of course, from Sahel. Just to give some number, just to remind us the proportion, the dimension of the crisis. Lake Chad, which is in the middle of Sahel, on the border between Chad and Niger, sunken in the last, or shrinked in the last 50 years, between around 90%. It was in 1962, 28,000 square kilometers. Today it's less than 1,400. Every inhabitant of Sahel consume every year on average about 50 cubic meters of water, which is, by the way, not real clean water. In Italy, the per capita consumption is by year 986. In the United States, is 1,870. So from 50 till 1,870. No water, no life. It's a very common assumption. So life is definitely very difficult in Sahel. Of course, this area is of our interest. I tell you, I just come back from Afghanistan, having seen what happened there, and my mind was on Sahel, looking at what happened there. Knowing that our next attention, our next focus would be on this region, because this region is very much of concern. The challenges are infinite: economic stagnation, climate change, increasing shortages of natural resources, and of course, worsening of the pandemic, which is in the picture is, after all, not so great if you compare the pandemic to the other crises. The EU and its state member, and we heard yesterday Mr. Draghi, Prime Minister Draghi, Di Maio, Guerini, talking about Sahel at length, have been committed to support the G5 Sahel countries with the aim to address instability and promote sustainable development with a new integrated strategy. In 2020, which we'll talk about today, the Coalition of Sahel was launched with the aim to coordinate the collective response to the G5 Sahel states and their international partners in addressing regional challenges. We have with us to discuss about this, I would say, really important, central topic, some very important guests. First of all, Professor Emanuela Del Re. Emanuela Del Re, we had a short conversation just now. We can say a woman in the field, starting from that. She had been in the past in South Africa, in Albania, in Kosovo, in Nigeria, in Iraq, really in the field. She had been appointed recently EU Special Representative for the Sahel in 2021, so just now. And since 2018, she served as Italy Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. She's a sociologist, so she can really also from the human dimension, not only the, how can I say, geographical or geopolitical dimension of the area. So, sorry, maybe I would go one by one. I would prefer. So let's start with Professor Del Re with a first question. What is the new EU integrated strategy in the Sahel? How do you compare this strategy, this new approach, with the previous one in 2001, between 2011 and 2020? In few words, what Europe intends to do to face Sahel crisis in the next future?
Thank you very much for this question. When you were talking about the bad news that come from the Sahel, I have to confirm that we need good news. That's definitely something on which we are all working, and together with our partners in the Sahel, which I would like to clarify for the European Union, is composed of 5 countries, which are Mali, Niger, Chad, and Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. Well, we are working to certainly change things and especially achieve development, which is very difficult at the moment because unfortunately, even in our policies of intervention, we are bound to emergency, to humanitarian, and it's very difficult to move the step forward. We discuss it very often with my friend, my brother, Ejime Adum. Certainly the new European Union strategy for the Sahel comes after some revolutions, as I would like to say, because we have started, and this is really a cultural revolution in the policy of the European Union. We started calling the countries of Africa in general, or the countries that we used to call third countries or developing countries, we are starting to call them partners, which means that if we have a partnership, we are both responsible for our actions, and we are working together for a future that is in common between us. So this is the first step that I think makes a distinction between the latest European Union strategy, which was defined in April this year, and the previous one. Certainly, this approach of partnership has influenced strongly the principles on which the new Sahel strategy is based, which are obviously bound to the fact that we are fully aware now that we cannot only intervene at security level, meaning with military measures, but we have to very much focus on transforming society, helping the society to develop. And the key word in this sense is certainly governance. Governance is the most important element in the new strategy because we understand that unless we help the countries of Sahel in our partnership to develop solid institutions and especially create a system of welfare that would allow everybody to have access to basic services, we cannot guarantee a social cohesion and especially a social peace. Consider that if we put this in comparison with the security elements, of course, when we talk about terrorism, for instance, and this is something I repeat constantly, the reason why we should intervene in governance and create a solid welfare state is that, for instance, the terrorist groups and also the armed groups often offer the populations which they attack an alternative system of welfare. They offer them an alternative opportunity, which is, of course, an illusion. It's not a real welfare state, but they are convincing in this way some young people, especially youngsters, to adhere to that project, which is criminal, which is certainly only bound to benefit themselves, but it appears to the populations, especially in remote areas, and unfortunately in the Sahel, we have many areas which are not linked to the center, to the urbanized areas in which there are the capitals in general. These people are convinced by this illusion of being able to have an appropriate opportunity to develop their own life. So the fact that the European strategy is focusing on governance is fantastic. I think it's fundamental. And I have to say that the strategy has been developed together with the African countries, which means that finally we understand that unless we include them in our decisional processes, we cannot move a step forward. So governance, and also the last element that I would like to underline in the new strategy, which also of course includes security and development, and this is obvious, I would like to say, is the fact that there is a principle of mutual responsibility included, which means that the countries of Sahel are obviously mutually responsible for each other. And this is why we have the Coalition Sahel, that is an overarching structure that guarantees that there is an harmony between the 5 countries. But in the way I interpret the principle on which the strategy is based, I would like to say that this mutual responsibility is also a mutual responsibility between the European Union and the countries of Sahel. And I will conclude by saying that this mutual responsibility implies, once again, that we have to work together. And then also the fact that, for instance, we are investing an immense amount of money. We are responsible for the management of that money in the region. How can we guarantee that the money really achieves the objectives and the aspirations that we have at the basis of our structure, and especially at the basis of our strategy? This is a big question, but I have to say that considering that many more countries in the European Union are now wanting to be participating in concrete actions, Lithuania, Estonia, which we might think are very far from Sahel, in reality, they feel that they can contribute and they want to contribute. In this sense, the good news is we are many more in the European Union. We have a strategy. We know where we are going. We have some means because the funds are conspicuous, and therefore maybe together with the countries of Sahel who are also willing to change things, maybe we can achieve good things.
Professor, just a little follow-up. Can you give us a practical example of one of the projects in which you believe particularly, which you think would be implemented in the next
well, I usually, when I visit the countries, I've just completed my tour of the 5 countries, and of course I met all the presidents of all the countries, and I also met all the representatives of the government, but I also met all the NGOs, youth organizations, women, and I also visited projects. There are many projects, of course, in the sanitary field. There are many projects funded by the European Union, which I find particularly effective because they fight against malnutrition and other. We have good projects for governance, meaning, for instance, electoral assistance and also administrative assistance. We have a number of projects to develop the ownership by the country through, for instance, financing projects for women and the youth to create small economic opportunities. These are really, it's such a vibrant moment moment for these activities, that I think we should protect it, and of course also contrast some sentiments that are going around in the region, in which it is felt that ONG and NGOs and humanitarian aid is not really creating ownership, but is actually creating a culture of dependence. I think instead that we are starting to move step forwards and especially develop new opportunities. But Francesca De Mauro, that who will be here now, will explain more about that. Thank you very much for this question.
Thank you very much. Second member of our panel is Professor Dr. Dijam Adoum, High Representative Coalition for the Sahel. Dijam Adoum is High Representative Coalition for Sahel. Prior to this charge, he was Executive Secretary of the Permanent Interstates Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, and former Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation of Chad. So actually, Dr. Adoum, I can say your titles invite the question, and the question is water. We are talking about now practical intervention. We are talking really, I would like today with you not only, I could say, express some form of principle, but go to the subject, go to the real practicability of the project and of the intervention of foreign countries in the Sahel region. So first of all, how would you intervene? What would you do in order to try to cope with the water crisis? This is apparently one of the major problems. I was in Niger recently, and I found people were escaping from Chad region, and the main reason was water, which of course the lack of water caused the growing presence of fundamentalist movements, of jihadists, Boko Haram, etc., etc. So it's a crisis which go then politically provoke some political effect. So the first question is really, what would you ask to the European community, to the 5 countries, to how they would do, what they should do to cope with the water problem?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I can answer the question to water, I'd like to put it in a larger context, the coalition, what is it, how it came about, and then we move on from there. Once we create the context, we're going to move on to specific questions related to water and other issues in the region. The coalition is born out of the interest of the 5 presidents. As Madam Minister stated, the 5 countries, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, that constituted the G5 countries with the president of France back in 2020. They progressively moved into operationalizing the coalition. February 2021, they had a summit. They created this coalition. They sent out a large communique saying, we had military surges. What we need to do now is accompany that military surge with other surges, political, economic, and so on and so forth. From that, we developed the roadmap, and the roadmap constitutes 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is fight against terrorism. Pillar 2 is reinforcing the national armies' capabilities to carry out the fights. Pillar number 3, return of the state to provide goods and services. Pillar number 4 is where the big projects, structural projects, are there and piloted by the Alliance Sahel. They decided to put us in Brussels, so there is a secretariat in Brussels, where is the heart of where everybody is, and I'm happy to report that we are working very closely with the Minister Del Rey and the related services. The coalition benefits from about 60 plus entities, all belonging to the coalition. So that's the framework within which then we're going to move forward to asking or responding to the specific questions that are asked. Now, before we get to water, right now as we speak, Sahel is experiencing severe headaches, terrorism, fights. There are turbulences, various variables, various tornadoes all operating simultaneously. What we need to do is we need to look at what makes up those tornadoes, and then understand them and look at the interaction among them so that we can sort them out and specifically attack each one of them so we can create leverage and create opportunities to undertake the vast program that will come to water. Naturally, as he stated earlier, back in 60, Lake Chad was 25,000 square kilometers. If you look at it now, it's about maybe 1,200, 2,000 square kilometers, which means that the surface of the lake shrunk significantly. And as you well know, when the surface of the water shrinks, folks who live nearby, whose livelihood depends on water, then move around, and that creates pressure on the other lands. And then we get into fighting, we get into banditism, we get into a lot of different activities. So what do we do? Luckily, in the Sahel, for the 5 countries, we're going to talk about the 5 countries because this is the focus of our discussion. As we speak right now, when I was at SILS, we began a project funded by the World Bank for the 6 countries, including Senegal. It's the first time that we have a structural program dealing with water. So basically what it means is that, okay, there's a $170 million investment by the World Bank. We went around and secured different funds. Other folks came to the table, and we increased the portfolio of that investment. So what it says is that we cannot do much of anything if we don't have water. Reason, in that region, it rains once a year, sometimes 3 months. And the rainfall distribution nowadays is very erratic due to climate change, deregulation. Either it rains a lot here, it doesn't rain here, so on and so forth. So it compromises the growing season. So with this project of water, then we need to say, okay, water devices, water harvesting technologies, water input from the well, from the lake, so on and so forth, and putting it all in a manner, because we can't just go pumping it whichever way we want. Now we're using science and technology to make sure that we're not depleting the resources. And so what people do with water is they produce 2 or 3 times a year. If it rains a lot in Niger, you know it, what happens? We capture that water and then we use it for the second growing season. And every 2 or 3 months, a crop matures, and that provides us the opportunity to provide sufficiently food, transform, create wealth and jobs. So we have $170 million in water. The European Union is going to be sinking more resources, appealing on folks who are interested in investing. There are opportunities because of huge surface areas, lots of opportunities. Yes, it is somewhat steaming out there, but it's not only bad news, there are also very good news. And I invite you to come to the European Union. You have bilateral relationship with those countries. Come to us in Brussels, and we'll tell you exactly how it is. And together we'll be able to create leverages and move forward to creating opportunities so that the issue related to water will be settled so that folks will not get out of their area, stay there, become stable, and then engage in activities likely to help us create a good living environment rather than sending kids to either come to Europe looking for Europe and falling in the sea or going into the woods and becoming bandits, terrorists, and what have you. So why don't we stop here for now with that question to our, and then we move on to other questions. Well,
allow me to, again, have a follow-up on this question. And sorry, I don't want to sound provocative or offensive, but this is a question which generally when I ask to local people in different countries, they say, you are Westerner, you all have this colonialist attitude. But, you know, we saw it in the last tens of years. Whenever there are a lot of money coming from big organizations in a local area, the corruption is rampant. One of the reasons of Afghani crisis, the collapse of Afghani government, was corruption. Corruption with money came from the coalition. There is a lot of corruption in Africa, we know. Corruption is in Iraq. corruption is whenever there are money coming, doesn't matter from where. So how the countries which are providing this help can, together with the local authorities, we hope not corrupted authorities, will be able to control the use of this money, the management of the resources, to avoid that money will be wasted or even worse, will go to the wrong hands?
Well, it's very simple. All of you stop being complacent. So when you put in money, resources, we have a pot of money for which there are programs. We get together in the sandbox and we define the objectives, the results, and the specific indicators for which we look in results. So when we design, we implement, then everybody should be at the table. We look at the extent to which the resources invested are generating results. So let's look at this. Simply stated, we have two variables. We have budget and programs. And we say, okay, we have $1 million for a given program. And then we begin in day one. And we start working. Well, initially, they will say, well, the investment is much higher than the progress results. But generally speaking, if we move forward, these two variables behave like this, the budget goes like this, and the programs trails. And at the end, you look at this, you see where I'm coming from with this? There's this huge gap. And due to complacency, both from those who manage the money, we spend a lot of time explaining why things did not work. That's the huge gap. We wasted a lot of time and energy and resources. So the time has come with respect to saying, okay, we're all together, we look at it, each one of us will have a role to play, the people who are benefiting from it at the table, and then we deploy. And then when we have systems of monitoring and evaluation, we collect, we analyze, and we get everybody at the table, say, we spent this much money, how much did we get out of it? Consistent with what we spend, do we think it's reasonable to expect that this much results is acceptable? And if you do that, then we're going to certainly move away from wasting the resources. I'm not in the business of explaining or trying to justify anything. You and us, all of us together, we need to get out of our zone of comfort and no more accepting the fact that we can explain. You go back to Brussels here and there, we're explaining, well, it was a difficult situation. No, we need to be accountable, held accountable for the taxpayers of your countries and held accountable back home so that business as usual is no longer acceptable, tolerable. In fact, that's why lack of opportunities create all the problems we are experiencing. And we're saying if we get out of our zone of comfort, we should be able to reverse the trend.
Thank you. We go to our third panelist, Francesca Di Mauro. Is she connected? Can you hear us? Francesca Di Mauro?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Yeah, okay.
Hear me. Yes.
She's Deputy Director General of Directorate General for International Partnership, responsible for the Sahel. And for the last 18 years, experience in developing transition economies, of which more than 13 in the European Commission External Action. I will go straight to the projects, since you are managing the project. Again, I will ask you the same question I asked before to Professor Del Rey. Can you focus? Can you explain us? Can you tell us about some of the major projects for Sahel that you are studying, considering, following? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be in this very distinguished panel. So thank you very much for the invite. I'm not Deputy Director General. I'm a Deputy Director for Africa, and I'm Head of Unit for West Africa, just to be clear. So, I mean, indeed, just in very broad terms, and Professor Jumeadoum already explained the whole architecture of the coalition. And one of the pillars of the coalition is this pillar 4, which is focusing on long-term development. So this is where the alliance comes in. And so the alliance is what we kind of established since 2017. It was a Franco-German EU initiative precisely to bring together all the donors, the bilateral, the multilateral. So we also have the World Bank, the African Development Bank, UNDP, to improve coordination. I just want to first say in a second that in a minute that indeed in the Sahel there are many actors, as there are many strategies around the Sahel, and now we have our renewed EU strategy. There are also many actors, of course, who want to help. So coordination is a big challenge. And so that is why these big, let's say, structures, the main effort is really to coordinate. What we try to organize the projects along 6 priority areas. So we have projects in relation to education and creation of jobs. This means, for example, doing, TVET, which is the vocational training, technical and vocational training for the youth, precisely because 65% of people in the Sahel are youth, to provide them some skills in order to, actually have some other jobs in relation to agriculture, in relation to transformation of agriculture, so that indeed the alternative state that the terrorists can offer is less appealing. Then a second area is agriculture, rural development, food security. I think we have to remember all the time that food insecurity is a big issue in the Sahel, and currently we actually have 27 million people in food insecurity. So what all our projects do is really to try and improve the capacity to produce sustainably and to provide nutritious food for the population. Then we have energy, because this is, of course, also a critical issue. And here we're not talking, energy like connected to the main grid. We are talking about off-grid solutions, solar panels, and we have some solar panel plants, like, for example, in Agadez is one of the big ones we have, precisely because access to energy is important for many sectors, including the social sectors, including the schools, and including the hospitals and the health centers. Then we have decentralization, which is precisely also what was mentioned before by Professor Del Rey, the fact that these are very remote areas where we have this strong insecurity. And so the local authorities in those remote areas really need to be strengthened in their capacity to provide basic services. Again, health, education, but also administrative services to the population. So we have a whole series of projects on decentralization. Governance, this is rightly said already, a very important area. And here, of course, we have many projects in relation to access to justice. And for example, the police, internal security forces. I want to also highlight that access to justice is very much linked to what you just asked Jimmy Adoum in relation to corruption and impunity. I mean, one of the new things also of the new EU strategy is, and also the roadmap, the coalition roadmap, is to really put the finger on fighting impunity and fighting corruption. And this, of course, goes through making sure that those who commit those crimes of corruption, and who those, for example, even the security forces who commit, exaction vis-a-vis the population, get to, to trials and get convicted, because this, of course, has an impact on the trust between the population and the security forces, which again is a strategy to fight terrorism. Because if, of course, the population does not have trust in the basic state structures like police, like army, then of course they will turn towards the alternative state. So this is completely in line with that. And then yes, internal security forces, because we believe that police also is the missing link. Of course, we did a lot, and there's a lot of action with the armed forces and with the security to make sure that zones are let's say cleared of terrorists. But then you need to bring immediately the police, because the police is the one that can have a stronger link with the population. So these are the 6 areas. Just want to give you some examples. I mean, over the years, the alliance in terms of structure, most of the projects are really in the social and agriculture sector. Let's not think that we only do security. Security is just 20% of all what the EU did in the Sahel, which was this 4.6 billion that we did since 2014. 20% is on security. The rest is almost half in social sectors and in agriculture, food security. 20% is on governance, and 9% on infrastructure. Examples in agriculture, as we all know, livelihood, 2/3 of the population in the Sahel live of agriculture and live of livestock. So here we have that we provided food assistance to almost 3 million people over the last 3 years, if you want to look at the last 3 years. Or we have provided also support to agriculture producers, to 500,000 agriculture producers, to give them, for example, little kits, to be able to produce at a higher productivity, improved tools for agriculture, so that they can increase their productivity, which is extremely low. Or for example, providing vaccination for the livestock, because this is also a big issue that, livestock, also gets the disease. So vaccination for livestock is another thing. And then, of course, in the health sector, we have many, let's say, results in relation to number of children that are vaccinated. Almost over 3.4 million children that have been vaccinated against, the various diseases that for children. Or access to energy. This is also another aspect of what we do. So, I mean, of course, we have a huge number of projects, as you know, over 800 projects. There are many of us involved, and so results. I think we have also some available documents that can show you all the results in detail. But so I mean, you can find it, and that's what you can look through. But there are many results, but maybe we can come back on the issue of governance and what is different with this EU strategy.
Sorry, just briefly, if you can, Dr. Di Mauro, something which I would like you to address, an element which already Professor De Red mentioned, this fact that whenever there is a failed state, when situations get out of control, anarchic, I would say, local bandits, criminals, extremists, jihadists, terrorists, call it you want, try to take the role of the state to provide basic services. It happened in Lebanon with Amal, with Hezbollah, in Gaza with Hamas, in Afghanistan with the Taliban, in Iraq with the different militia, Shia or Sunni, Daesh or whatever. So the question is, how much you see in the region you are working in, this element torpedoing, disturbing, creating problem to your project? If you can, please, shortly, because we have not much time.
Yes. No, I mean, clearly, I mean, this is the main issue of, of occupying the space. That's what we were saying, when we talk about the civilian surge and making sure that the state can return. In fact, sometimes it's not even return of the state. Sometimes it's actually the state was never there, because these are very, low, far away regions that have never really been addressed by the state. So this is the whole issue of making sure that we have basic services that, that offer actually the right, the state alternative to the non-state alternative. So in terms of disturbances, of course, they happen. I mean, sometimes some of our NGOs with which we work, they get, attacked. They get, they get also, asked for racketing, for funds. So that is why we have to really choose also carefully with whom we work, but we also do a lot of social cohesion and of reconciliation type of projects, precisely in the very difficult area where we can also, sometimes use some NGOs that actually can talk to these armed groups and for example, agree that maybe health centers or schools will not be attacked, because of course this is also against, let's say, what some of the terrorist group also want. They don't want also the population to turn against them. So in some areas we've been able to do some little kind of agreement, which are very delicate and very fragile, but still, to make sure that some of these key, let's say, structures for health and for education are not attacked. But clearly, there's an issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry? Of course. Yeah.
Right now, as we speak, I said earlier, the situation is very difficult. That is, the military surge provided good results, but the follow-up, the space has not been occupied by the national defense forces, and in such a way that whatever was gained is lost. And that is where the question is, what we need to do within the framework of the peace facility, that what the European Union and the other partnerships are doing, is that we need to go back to the Sahel and reinforce the fighting capabilities of the national armies, so that when Pillar 1, when the military makes some gain, then the state occupies that space, providing basic security services, so that the NGOs, the developers, everybody can go back in and provide goods and services. In a nutshell, what is happening now is that we need training for those armed forces. We need logistical support. We need intelligence so that they can really do the job. Otherwise, the military plan by themselves, they go and liberate an area, forces are not there to occupy and provide the security needed so that the state returns to provide goods and services. And that's why the coalition is galvanizing the international communities to bring much needed support to rearrange the whole framework so that we can chase those guys out of town and reoccupy the space and provide goods and services and establish a much needed and happier living space. Thank you.
We don't have much time, but really this is a central question. Thank you, central point. Thank you very much. The question of training, the question of military presence. We know France started at large at about 2012, 2013 with the famous Barkhane operation in Mali, which was at the beginning successful, but then start to have many more victims. Italy, as we heard yesterday, is now sending troops to underman the Takuba mission and promising to increase the military presence. Of course, we'll need a coalition, we'll need a cooperation between the different contingents. Of course, sorry to insist, but in my mind comes the example, which are the terrible failure of Afghanistan. When we hear training local troops, look what happened to the Afghani police and the Afghani army. So of course, lesson learned, what we learn from Afghanistan. Sorry, I don't want to focus on Afghanistan, but as Afghanistan is just what happened in front of our eyes 3 months ago. It's very important to learn, to think, to consider what happened in order not to repeat it. So, Professor Dere, the ground is the military dimension. What are we doing? What we can do? What we learn? What we will do in the next future?
I think that from the last two interventions by my brother Jimé Adoum and by Francesca Di Mauro make it very clear to us the fact that we need to work very closely on the link between security and development. It's very difficult to achieve this aspiration because to put together development and security is not easy at all. I have to say that the European Union is present in the region in various capacities. Francesca Di Mauro was mentioning the police dimension and Jimé Adoum, the more military, to just give you a picture of the geopolitics of our presence as European Union. That means 27 member countries, of course, agreeing on these interventions. Sorry, I want to mention the fact that we have police missions like EUCAP Mali and EUCAP Niger, who are devoted to training, as well as EUTM Mali, for instance, which is a training mission for the military. EUTM Mali has trained something like 18,000 soldiers in the last 7 years. So that means that there is a corpus of intervention at military level quite significant. I also want to mention Garci because we are in Italy and Italy is participating to this mission led by Spain. So you can understand that the actual body of what we are doing is quite diversified and is obviously quite intense in a sense. We also have, and this is important to underline, a joint force of the G5 countries of the Sahel, which is very, very important. I visited the headquarters of all these missions in the region because I think it is important to understand what is going on and how effective they are. Why did I want to try to understand their effectiveness? Because with talking to each Minister of Defense of each country, I realized what Jimé Adoum was saying, the fact that there is a strong request before everything else to increase the number of soldiers, for instance, on field. President Bazoum told me that they want to double the number of soldiers by 2025, pass from 25,000 now to 50,000 in 2025, which will mean, of course, double barracks, double equipment, double logistics, which gives us a sense of what is actually going on in the region, which is certainly affected very strongly by security because, as I discussed with Bazoum in particular, but also with the others, for instance, Niger is the country with the least index of development, of human development in the world. Can you imagine waking up in the morning and discovering that your country has the least human development index in the world? And at the same time, they don't know how to solve the situation. They want to increase development. They want to focus on education, but until the security problem is solved, they cannot do much. Of course, I want to make an appeal to our member states because we need more participation in the missions that are led by the European Union. We need more personnel. At the moment, we have a new European peace facility that Jimé just mentioned, which is a new way of interpreting our responses to the demands of the countries, which are very, very specific. They never talk about very vague things. They talk about very specific needs, which need, in my view, very specific responses. And the needs are, of course, to respond to specific challenges. I want to mention Libya, for instance. There is a huge circulation of arms that are supposed to come from Libya. That is another challenge they have to face, not only jihadist groups, not only armed groups which are formed often just to create problems and conflicts, not really organized in a sense that they want to take the state or really change completely the situation in a specific country. So we can understand that the security aspect is very, very complex. The new Takuba mission that will which is already in place and that will in a way give a new let's say a philosophy to the intervention of the European Union countries in the region is a mission that really enhances the fact that we are a big family, that we want to participate in the security issues at a higher level with more participation. And this is also why the French are redistributing their forces and they are reorganizing. I always respond to the provocation regarding the French that probably it is their will to be more contemporary because the situation has changed on field. The situation requires better responses. The situation is bound to the fact that the countries themselves know very well what they were doing. And I just want to conclude by saying, to give you an example, if we think that there is stagnation, of course, there are immense challenges. For instance, at the moment, I'm incredibly worried by Burkina Faso. But Burkina Faso, at the same time, has defined a new defense and security strategy, which I discussed with the Minister of Security and the Minister of Defense, because they have two ministers, very thoroughly analyzing each step. And I have to say that that was, for me, a good news, because this new strategy is really inspired by the principles that we Europeans share completely. So there are opportunities, but unfortunately, we need a better coordination. We need a better cohesion between all of us, considering that there are many other actors on field. Some are competitors. I don't want to go too deeply into Russia, but it is a competitor, and China, but China is not that much on this field. But I want to also say that regarding Afghanistan, it is true that there could be some sort of similarity. But honestly, our engagement in the Sahel is not as big as the one in Afghanistan. The countries are separated and are different situations. The situation in general is not such that you know, the terrorists or the jihadists and the armed groups are not taking over single states. So I wouldn't really make a big comparison. Of course, it's always good to reflect on potential inspiration of jihadist groups, but I don't think it is comparable.
Yeah, on this domain, rule of engagements. One of the problems of the coalition there, I'm not talking about the country now, about the functioning of the different military contingents from different countries with different cultures, history, past. One of the major problems there was the inequality, was that the different contingent had different rules of engagements. Is there any attempt in the partner who are now working, military partner, who are working in Sahel, to have an homogeneous approach?
Well, actually, we are the European Union, meaning that we are a family. And people, the countries that have adhered to the project of Takuba, for instance, they have decided their own contribution. Of course, there will be a command. That's the thing, that there is a command which is, you know, defining the rules of engagement. But I honestly think that the fact that many countries have decided to participate is really good news, because it means that there is a more diffused interest in intervening in a region like Sahel, which I always define as the real southern frontier of Europe. So there is a new awareness. I think that on this awareness we can build a lot. And I have to say, of course, each country keeps its own personality, but that is the motto of the European Union: unity in diversity. And I think that in a mission like that, which is particularly needed at the moment, this diversity will be a richness, not certainly not a problem.
Thank you very much. As you see, the subject is immense. I would have gone on asking questions for the next 3 hours. Of course, people here are already telling me the time is over. So I thank our panelists. Really, thank you very, very much to all of you. Unfortunately, 2 of them couldn't participate, but I hope it was rich enough. Thank you very, very much to everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly invite you to remain seated as we start